story. This is a story about the first Rebbe of Chabad. In the time of the first Rebbe of Chabad was a tremendously great and holy man called the Gaon, the genius of Vilna, Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna. Vilna. And he, yes, Eliyahu of Vilna. And at that time, there was a tremendous enemy of Judaism, what was called the Enlightenment movement. Enlightenment movement. These were especially Jews that were very smart. A lot of them had learned Talmud. They had been religious, or their parents had been religious, but very religious. And they left the whole business. They left everything. And they totally embraced non-Jewish ideas. In those days, like 300 years ago, so that's when science was really starting to bloom, and all these new ideas were coming up, explaining the world, and Newton and all this, and what's his name, Darwin, and these were really grabbing on and taking effect. That everybody thought everything could be explained by science, and that religion was only when you didn't have a better explanation, so you grabbed onto these straws. Anyway, the fact is they were making big, amazing revelations, scientific revelations, which nowadays those revelations have been thrown out the window, but nevertheless, most of them. So this Gaon of Vilna, this genius of Vilna, Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna, he sent, according to one opinion, 10, according to the other, tens of his pupils to Berlin. Berlin, that was the big center, that they should learn some of these wisdom ideas and that they could make use of it. It ended up that all of them left Judaism. All of them. They all left Judaism. They came, they found people that were just like them, that were living happy lives. And they were living in this black and white life, learning Torah, waiting to go to heaven. And they all left it, except for two. One of them was a man called Moshe Meislis, and the other one was a person called Fagin. I don't know what his first name was. And they had doubts. They had doubts about Judaism, but they also had doubts about this Enlightenment movement stuff. Both of them eventually, they started searching around, and both of them came to the first Rebbe of Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad. And both of them became Chassidim. Both of them became devoted followers of the first Rebbe of Chabad, and they left all this. But this fellow Fagin still had little doubts, to the degree that once the first Rebbe of Chabad, Rabbi Shner Zalman, he was giving some sort of a Chassidic discourse about washing your hands, and this fellow Fagin had a little smirk on his face, like, really. And the first Rebbe said, I think there's a little worm eating away at his soul. He said to somebody that's sitting next to him, a little worm is in him. And this fellow Fagin, he was a big genius and he was a very talented person. He was also a businessman. So once in a while, he would ask permission for the Rebbe to replenish his funds and go and do business. So he went to the Rebbe and asked him for permission if he could go and make some sort of business endeavors. And the Rebbe said, yes, you can. But do me a favor, when you go by the city of Karlin, please, if you can, go in and see the Rebbe of Karlin, Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin, and give him greetings from me. And so we did that. This fellow Fagin, he did so, and he went on his journeys, whatever, and he happened to be near the city of Karlin. So we went to the synagogue of this, or the headquarters of this Rebbe Shlomo of Karlin, and his secretary said, oh, you come from the Rebbe of Chabad, they're very good friends, and please sit outside of his office. Since he's in his study right now, sit outside in the hall outside of his office, and he'll come to see you. I'll go in and I'll tell you that you're here, you're waiting for. So he sat there, and there was nobody else in the hall. He was the only person in the hall, sitting in the hall, and he was waiting for the Rebbe to open up the door. Suddenly he hears from inside of the Rebbe's office somebody running back and forth, moving at a tremendous, furious pace. He's chairs being knocked over, and the table is moving. He hears once in a while something breaks on the floor, and he's very, what's going on? Suddenly the door opens up. The Rebbe of Karlin, who had an awesomely holy, he was an awesomely holy person himself, an awesomely holy face looked out, and he said to him in Yiddish, I'll say it in English, maybe after all, God does exist. Tomer fart alts is Franen Eibishter. Maybe after all, God does exist. And they slammed the door. So this fellow Fagin was sitting out there. He was waiting to go into this Rebbe. And he thought maybe the Rebbe would open up the door and let him in or something. But the Rebbe looked out at him in such and his face was so, how do you say, startlingly, awesomely holy. Oh, I can't think of a better word for it, but it just startled him. And he sat back and he thought, well, I guess I should wait. And he heard again, walking back and forth. And the same thing repeated itself. About 2 minutes later, he opened up the door and he said, maybe after all, God exists. He slammed the door again. And then he heard the third time, again, he was walking back and forth. And each time his face was like more burning with intensity. And the third time, the same thing happened. He opened up the door. The Rebbe opened up the door, looked outside and said, maybe after all, God does exist. And he closed the door. This fellow Fagin, it was enough. He couldn't take it anymore. It was shaking up his whole soul, and he ran away, left. In any case, he eventually left Judaism. This Fagin fellow, he left Judaism. He abandoned totally the Torah and the commandments, and he went on to bigger endeavors, whatever. Became a professor, the Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, he passed away. And his son became the Rebbe. And shortly thereafter, the Russian government announced, or they made known, or at least it became known to the Rebbe, that they were going to build a big road, or a railroad, or whatever it is, a big road. And the road was going to go right over the grave of the Alter Rebbe in the city of Hadich. It was going to go over the grave of his father, which means either that they would uproot the grave or that the Chassidim had to come and uproot the grave, and they didn't want to because the Rebbe wanted to be buried in that place. It was a special importance to be buried there. So they didn't know what to do. So they went to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, he picked one of the Chassidim. According to one version I heard of it, the Chassid was Rabbi Moses Meislish, and that he was one that had been with this Fagin. He put this Moses Meislish, and he said, you go to Petersburg and get an audience with the Minister of the Interior, Minister of Transportation, whatever, and sit with him, and you can convince him. So Rabbi Moses Meislich, the Rebbe told him to do it, so he did it. Didn't know what possibly effect it was going to hit, what he can have, but he did it. And he went into the room, and he was escorted in by soldiers. He was sat down. There was this awesome soldier standing on both sides of the minister. And he sat down, he looked at the minister, and he said, that's right. You recognize me, right? He said, yes. He said, I'm Fagin. I'm the one that was with you. He claps his hands, and the soldiers go out, and they come back, or whatever, the soldiers are standing, and there comes in a servant with a tray that's covered over something. So this Moses Meisler says, well, what's going to be now? I'm a prisoner of this guy. Maybe he's going to want me to eat not kosher food. Maybe he's going to want me to drink not kosher wine. This is a difficult situation. I'm not going to eat it, of course, but on the other hand, it's a big dilemma. He pulled opened up the covering, the silver cover that was covered over this, and there was a bottle of vodka with some pickles. And he said, I've left Judaism. I don't want anything to do with Judaism whatsoever. I've left everything, but two things I miss. I miss the Rebbe, and I miss the Chassidic get-togethers. Let's make up for bringing. So he poured 2 cups of vodka, and they sat and they drank, and they ate pickles, and they drank, and they talked, and they sang, and they danced. And afterwards, he sat down, huffing and puffing, and said, okay, now tell me, what did you come here for? He said, I came here because of the road. He says, the road, Hadich. Yes, he took out a big map. He said, where does that road go? Over here. Took out an eraser, erased it where it goes to Hadich, and made a line that it goes around Hadich, and that ended it. What happened to Fagin afterwards, I don't know. Reb Moses Meislish, he came out to be one of the big, well-known Hasidim, and he was also very instrumental, and this was in the time of the first Rebbe of Chabad, in defeating Napoleon. Napoleon. And in any case, we see that, so I'm sorry, I left out the only thing. So this Fagin said, you should know that every day, every moment, I remember that Rabbi Shlomo Karlin, how he looked out and he said, maybe after all, God exists. Maybe after all, there is a God. Maybe after that always puts in my mind that I can't leave Judaism totally. I'm always so when the Chassid, Rabbi Moses Meisler, or whatever Chassid that was sent, when he went back to the second Rebbe of Chabad and he told him the story, so he said, why didn't the Rebbe himself say that to this Fagin? Maybe God exists. And the Rebbe's son, the second Rebbe of Chabad, said, because the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe, he couldn't bring himself to say maybe God exists. He couldn't say maybe. By him, God certainly existed. Even to say such a thing, he wasn't able to do. Have a good day with Mashiach now.